The HX Collective explores the human experience through three main channels of life: work, relationships, and self. With raw, authentic conversations, the podcast investigates how challenges can become powerful teachers, leading to personal growth and deeper connections. Rooted in humanity-centered design, each episode reflects a commitment to doing good and doing well, featuring diverse voices and generational perspectives. Expect gripping stories of struggle and success, with thought-provoking discussions and concrete tools and tactics that encourage you to rethink your relationship with distress, helping you to establish your full human experience. This is the HX Collective channel. Well, hello, friend. It is frequent flyer mile week with you. I loved that we got to be in person this week, and I love that we have been on video recordings multiple times. And I have to say, you can tell that this is about to be a really important conversation because we're both wearing lipstick. I think that should tell people that we're about to do something epic.
I would challenge that and say that you could tell we were doing something important when we were dressed in yellow, white, and black for the Hawkeyes game this weekend. So for those of you University of Iowa students, parents, alum, Deb and I both have daughters that go to school at University of Iowa. And so we have the very great fortune of tailgating together.
I'm telling you, go Hawks. I mean, who would have ever thought that we would be so committed to gold and black? And we went full out. So I just think that having this conversation in particular, it's an extension of things that we talk about all the time, whether we're tailgating or we're doing some, really impressive consulting project with wealth advisors in Canada. This is, I think, a super opportunity for us to support, the mission of the HX Collective is we're both so deeply committed to elevating human flourishing. But I think today's a really special conversation because it's deeply personal. And, when I think about the sort of the vantage point from which we're coming into today's discussion, both as women business owners, having 2 decades of collaboration and just in creating together, today is really an important conversation as women. And, so much of this is about your mission and how you are putting art and content and empowerment into the world in service to women. And I think it's a terrific opportunity to think about what's in front of us as we look at this point in time. And, we're recording at the end of 2025, and this has certainly been a year that is unprecedented. And I was at a conference earlier this week and someone said, I long to live in a year that's precedented. But, as you kind of come into this conversation, Andrea, I'm really hoping that first and foremost, when we are going to talk about women and what it means to really elevate human flourishing through the lens of gender, like what is it about that framing and the work that you're doing in your business? Maybe you can just set the stage a little bit so folks can join our conversation in progress.
Yeah, thanks. And I'm delighted. I feel like I'm the luckiest person in the world that gets to tailgate with you and collaborate with you. And I can't think of just a better person to have this conversation with than a woman that I do business and friendship and life with. So I am honored to be here. And, I guess maybe give a forewarning. This is the topic that is so near and dear to my heart. Like, this is a topic I could talk about at all levels, deeply, every day of my life. Warning, I'll put it in as a podcast. This might go deep and lengthy. And so for those of you listening, if you're not in the mood for something deep today, I feel like find something lighthearted. So as background for new listeners to the HX Collective podcast, I am Andrea Mac, and my career has been in professional services, primarily driving revenue for professional service providers, whether they are doer-seller, entrepreneurs, founders, sales teams, anyone who has a goal to drive revenue or growth in some way. My background is in legal and in specifically being a chief marketing officer for a law firm. And in 2020, I decided to leave my very stable, very predictable corporate job in order to launch Prequal. And prequel, in case it isn't like super obvious, is the what comes before. And prequel is spelled Prequal. So like the pre to equality. And so that little bit of background about the name of my company. But I really wanted to take the tools and life experience and strategies that I know well and apply them in a different context. So in addition to helping these professionals, as you mentioned, like wealth managers, wealth advisors, lawyers, consultants, engineers, really wanted to focus on how my tools could drive economic empowerment for women specifically. Women in the entrepreneurial sector, women in the doer seller sector, women in developing nations. Like, how do women contribute to economic development? And that's really not only my professional focus, but it is my life passion. It is my obsession. What do they call it? It's your fall of Rome, or I don't know, whatever that TikTok trend is. It's my fall of Rome. Or so I really think about and obsess about and learn about and read about and teach what role women can play in economic development for themselves, for their companies, and the communities they reside in, and why that's a real business strategy, but also, from my perspective, the foundation for human flourishing. Like, there can be no human, I'm going to go bold, there can be no human flourishing without considering the role that women play in human
Well,
flourishing.
I get the added benefit of agreeing with you, but I want to take a step back to the context, in which you did this. And I can say, first of all, when you decided this was the time, it was one of those scenarios where even though all the circumstances were such that, you were in a wonderful position, you were having a great impact in the place you're working, but it was sort of in that moment where you couldn't, once you could see a vision and a calling, you couldn't unsee it. And so I think it's super important. And frankly, you've been a great mentor for me, and all the research that you've done and just the recognition of what an important business strategy this is as we're thinking about not only the level of flourishing just on a social and on a well-being front, but really at the center of economics. When you see women and when you look at what you've been researching and see women at the center of change, like, what is the correlation when you look at significant breakthroughs, whether it's in business or whether it's in social movements? Like, where do you see women playing a critical role when it comes to driving and building transformative change?
Oh, yikes. Okay. Big. Let's go big
Well,
early.
we
Let's
might
just
as well,
let's
right?
go deep. I mean, we got tailgating out of the way. Let's go revolution. So that's a great question. And I think some of it, there's three ways I want to answer that. First, there's always a personal lens at which you look at something, or that magnifies or underscores your professional work, right? Or where you want to show up in the world. And for me, I think it's important to consider a little bit of my upbringing and my childhood and my personal life. So I was raised by a single mom in a lower socioeconomic class and in a neighborhood that was often unsafe, and a slightly unstable childhood that was fueled by the outcomes and effects of poverty. So I grew up in poverty at a time where the systems did not really create access for people like me, or for people even more like my mother. So my parents had been married for over 20 years when their marriage abruptly ended. And my mom, who had left the workforce in order to raise children, as they did in those times, gave up any sort of career equity that she had. And so finding herself suddenly on her own and raising three kids with no economic access, or limited economic access, really created a compound disadvantage, as you can imagine. Not only were there the basic needs of feeding us and clothing us and sheltering us and educating us, but she really had to rebuild and start over. And so as a child, I watched my mom have to instantly create a way to make money. And so my mom started cleaning people's houses. And I think as a child, that significance of that move was lost on me. And not that I mean, cleaning a home and taking care of someone's home is a very noble cause. So there's no diminishment around the work, But when I think about having to re enter and not to be able to use the skills or the previous career development or any of the assets that she had to start from a 1-to-1 person ratio, convince someone to pay her to do something, and she had to hustle in that regard. Well, my mom, watching my mom, I mean, as a kid, I remember she'd come home and she'd tell us stories, and she was a really hard worker and really scrappy, and it was incumbent on her to keep food on our table. From there, she worked her way up to become the janitor at my grade school. And so when I think about this sort of like really proud moment of how you rise any specific rank, being the janitor at my grade school was a significant achievement for my family. And as a kid, it meant I got to spend more time with her and see her and things like that. And she eventually worked her way up to be the school secretary. So I share this story as such an early observation of when women have options, when they don't have options, what role money plays in the daily life of security, what it means for access, what it means for autonomy, what it means for all of those pieces. And it's interesting, I've always been so proud of that story and watching the ways that it showed up in me as a person and the way I mother now. And I think where it really like echoed and came together for me was throughout my career in legal. So, in legal, for those of you that are not in legal, or for those of you that are in legal, your ability to grow and build a book of business, so to get clients and drive revenue for the firm, really creates the opportunities to have leadership access, the opportunities for better or different or greater work, the opportunities to hire other people and direct budgets. And when I watched women in a legal environment, and we're talking about one of the most profitable career paths, they were still limited if they weren't able to sell on a one-to-one basis to create advantages or direct piece. So I think for me, it really started in my background and these significant points in my career to say, oh, like here it is. You have to be able to protect your financial participation and assets. And that is the only way that you will have autonomy. So whether it is getting clients to clean their house, whether it's getting clients to pay a multi-jurisdiction lawsuit, like these are the ways that individuals and specifically women can drive economic opportunity. And so second is that it drove me down this path of being really interested in, well, what does that mean? Like what is the system? How do women work within this current system and this current framework? How does this apply only to women? And what parts of the system are limiting and where does it come in? And so I started learning and reading and participating in everything I possibly could to understand the role a woman plays in economic participation, not only in America, but also in these developing nations. What it helped me, or where I came to understand, is that it's really critical and incumbent in a couple of different ways. The strength of a economy and a society has to do with, often can be traced back to how women are treated and the freedoms that they are given. And one of the most basic freedoms is the ability to decide when and where and how many children to have. And this is consistent across developing nations, in first world nations. That is a critical component that either derails autonomy or that provides a certain structure of safety. So regardless of where you fall in the issue of pro-life and pro-choice, and this is not it's not a political or a moral issue, it's really just a scientific and research affirmation that this is one of the critical points for a woman in a society in order to flourish. From there, it goes on to what capacity and ability she has when she is in labor and delivering those babies and post childcare. And then we start thinking about how those children and daughters specifically are educated. And then we start looking at unpaid labor and what a woman's role means in the home and outside of the home and what is actually possible. And so it's really complex when you think about the limitations, the system structures, the political ramifications or boundaries or constraints of a woman's ability to earn, because a woman's ability to earn really drives her capacity for what she says yes and what she says no to, and what boundaries are in place or where that influence is directed. And so which brings, so all of that considered, my personal aspect, what I've learned about how societies grow and flourish in general and how economies flourish, there really is this ability to earn at the center of it, and then considering those inputs. And I think it's really important, like the third and like kind of like last part about this is the statistics and data and research we know of the compound impact of having women flourish. So when women flourish, children grow up in safer households. There is less violence. There early rates of teenage pregnancy before someone is ready. There's higher levels of education. There's higher funding for social services because we reinvest back into our communities. So when you start looking at the outcomes and comparing cultures where they have a certain level of economic flourishment, it isn't just driven by capitalistic or consumeristic lenses. It's driven by this need to create flourishing within the household, and the woman is often at the center of that. So it's kind of three parts. It's my personal input. It's really this observation of the system and the limitations, and then what we know to be true when it's done well.
So I have to unpack that in so many ways. So when I look at your personal story, I think what's really curious about it is that you're one generation removed from that lived experience where women are stepping into a time and space of opportunity. And yet, when I think about our daughters and what a distinct starting point they're entering into the world, and as they become young adults, and what that must have been like for your mom to have to figure it out. And I think as we continue to unpack some of the things you've observed and where you watch women succeed and where you watch women struggle, I just need to take a moment to acknowledge that your mom's capacity, despite odds, is just this resilience and grit and this desire to, like, you have to figure it out. And I think so glad that you are prioritizing this as a big part of your mission and your work, because there's something really impactful when conditions can be nurtured, so that there's not only the self-reliance that your mom had to do, but the fact that we can have impact and influence, which make it less self-reliant, where we can build systems and structures that really do acknowledge the priority and importance that women play in the world. And at the same time, where it's not, if it is to be, it's up to me, like to see advantages that perhaps we can create in systems and structures so women don't have to be so grit driven. And it makes for an awesome story and a great inspiration. But I'm excited to see, how what you're engaging and what you're working on right now is directly designed for that next woman who is in your mom's situation with kids like she was in, like that, this opportunity to have avenues, to have options, to have choices. So I think there's a lot of power in that. I also want to also acknowledge what a beautiful story, and so much pride, and just the dignity of hard work. And I know, no one who knows you and people as they get to know you, no one's ever going to say, like, you will outwork the next relevant person in terms of hustle and ingenuity and creativity. And so I can imagine when you're doing some of this research and acknowledging that when women flourish, the world flourishes. Tell us a little bit more about this concept of the economic empowerment gap, because I do think, while there are things certainly anecdotally sort of referenced, I think there's some really meaningful consideration. And as we think about, well, what do we do about that? I think it's really important for folks to better understand, like, what you've discovered. And you mentioned a few things, even when you look at what happens when women are flourishing, the reduction in things like violence, the reduction in safety issues, the incidence of autonomy and freedom. So say a little bit more about that, because I think there's something there that maybe I don't know that we fully grasp.
Thanks. And I do think it's really important that I say up front too that my mom's story and my story is not unlike many out there. So while I'm proud of the grit and resilience, that's really what led me to thinking of, like, how are we in this? How do people get in this position? And how as a society do we create more safety nets? And I think that it's also important to acknowledge at the front end that even challenging as my path may have been and my upbringing, that there's a certain level of privilege also that comes with being a white woman. And so when I think about the role that women play, I think there's also a lot of work that still needs to be done on the role that white women need to play, and the respect and consideration for the role that women of color have played, and the systemic injustices, the systems that are designed to not only keep women down, but especially women of color. So before, like, I want to put that out there up front as an important part of the conversation too, because understanding a feminist lens or a pro woman lens requires you to be able to take a step back and really consider our sisters of color.
I think you added another layer of context. And I think that when we start to look at what is really happening for women, I think what you're describing is a vantage point, a point of motivation on why you feel even more compelled, that because there is a certain level of privilege.
Oh.
And I do think when we look at who's going to take a greater level of responsibility to pay attention to this, I think we can't ignore that vantage point, your starting point. While it is certainly, like you said, it's not unique to your own experience, there's also a unique responsibility that you can embrace. I think what you've shared with me, at least I've been really surprised by some of the things that you shared with me about economic empowerment. I remember, and even the concept of economic empowerment gap as like even a construct. And so the opportunity, I think, is just to maybe we can describe, what does that actually look like? And I think in particular, the one piece of data you shared with me, I was blown away by it, was the number of small businesses that are owned by women, and yet how many of them will eclipse, the milestone of $1 million in revenue. So maybe you can say a little bit more about the economic empowerment gap, and then specifically where that intersects even with women in business.
Thanks for keeping me on track. There's so much I could say about
Absolutely.
this, and so much that I obsess about that can get off track easily. So if we go back to the root belief that the health of a mom or the health of a woman in a society is there's a compound advantage and impact to that. That's true in a community and in a culture, and that's additionally true in a business environment. So what equity looks like is often depending on how the women are at the center of it, because we know what a woman does when she has additional autonomy, access to resources, etc. So I think it's important to consider a couple of different lenses. And so if the health of the woman or the mom creates this compound impact and this advantage and this little spider tentacle of positive benefits, then how do we start peeling back the layers of what creates autonomy? What are the limitations, and what can we control? And in all of my reading and research and participation, it's become clear that there are certain factors that we can control, which then lead us down a different path of the ability, like I said, the ability to earn. So let's break apart for a second, like entrepreneurship. So in the United States, and the number is fluid, but in the last 5 years, we have seen an uptick of women starting businesses more than any other point in history. And I think the last time I checked, I think in 2024, it was like a little over 52%. And so when you think about women owning half of the businesses in the US, and that's small businesses, that's startup, that's conglomerates, like women own a little more than half, if not half, depending on the day or the year. Women are only responsible, like we only actually can track back 3 to 4% of total revenues back to those women. So if we're owning 50%, where is the gap then on the revenue that that's producing and tying back to women? And then when we think about entrepreneurship and that lens as a means for economic freedom and the ability to drive your own earning potential, and often in cases, especially in developing nations or particular local economies, a traditional 9 to 5 job with the security, stability, predictability isn't available all the and so entrepreneurship by default can also be a more common scenario, like unintentional entrepreneurship, I should call it. So you've got these varying stages of women in business and women contributing to the economy through production or service or offering some sort of contribution. And yet there's some sort of gap between how much revenue is directed to how much revenue they're able to get. And there's a huge funding gap. So, especially in the United States, women are funded much less than men. We only get 2% of venture capital funds, which is a critical component to accelerating a startup. So, you look at these statistics of like, we know that women run like 63% of startups, successful startups are run by women. Like you look at all these like factors and statistics that show the diversity of it, that show if a woman is at the helm of a startup or at a company, like you, the positive statistics. And then we look at the access to capital, we look at the revenue statistics, and there seems to be a breakdown. So what is the breakdown between the continuity, the sustainability, the preservation of that ability to earn? And then you start kind of back to some of my initial points, you start thinking about what happens with unpaid labor. Why isn't there more economic opportunity driven toward women? Like why aren't women having access to higher paying jobs or senior positions? Why aren't they getting funding? Where does lending play a role in that? And it's a really complicated conversation that doesn't have one answer. But for me, it becomes so clear that if I can drive economic opportunity, whether it's access to a higher paying job, whether it's how to negotiate higher salaries and the compound impact over a period of time, whether it's creating more mentorship and leadership and all of that, for me, it's like crystal clear that if I can also teach women laterally to drive economic opportunity, that there's more than enough for us to drive because the statistics, and I should lower my statistics citing so we don't have to fact check as much or put as much in the show notes, but I forget the number off the top of the amount of spending women drive, the amount of choice over where we make buying decisions. Like all of those numbers point to women being at the center of it. So it does make you pause and say, like, well, where is this disconnect? And one of the big pieces over the last year and a half that I have come to realize, accept, and start to scope toward is that I think there's a common misconception and a displaced narrative over what women need or where that gap comes. So some of the common narratives that you'll hear is that like, oh, well, women are taught to compete with each other. Women are more competitive and not willing to collaborate. Or what women really need is access to lending. And that lending is really the accelerant. Or you hear all of the kind of misconceptions and narratives that I feel like that or women do business just totally different than men and there isn't a system set up for that. So these are narratives that fuel or slow down our progress of driving economic opportunity for each other. And really I think it's just far more simple than that. Putting aside the systemic issues, but like when you have an opportunity to drive budget, are you interviewing as many women as you can compared to men? Are you making sure that there are women of color in the room, that you're pulling from diverse backgrounds, socioeconomically, racially, like all of those things really matter. And so when you have the opportunity to drive a hiring decision, a purchasing decision, how are you ensuring that there's equity at the front end of that? How are you making sure that when you're in the rooms or the opportunities with people, that you're advancing that? And I think that another common narrative is like, we need more leadership, we need more mentorship. And while those things are critical, those are lagging indicators of economic autonomy and economic participation. So, again, another long winded answer, but from my perspective, it just feels so clear. It feels so clear that women are one of the catalysts at the center of home, community, business. Like all of the statistics are there. So now we're at the place in a society and in business where it's like, well, how do we teach women to drive economic opportunity to each other?
Well, all right. So let's kind of hold the space on the just the practical reality. Like I'm stunned by the percentages. I think I would have assumed that there would be some disparity, but I mean, but that significance in that gap. I'm also really reminded, and I think I can reflect on my own journey, how much when it is those narratives that our minds buy into that build barriers or create, even just a lack of consideration because we can't conceive a possibility to have things be a different outcome. As you know, I've had a bit of my own journey where I was an independent business owner, got approached by a private equity firm to sell. And then after a period of 6 years, managed to figure out a way to buy my business back. And I get asked very often, like, what was the driving factor? Were you hoodwinked? Were you, promised a bill of goods? And ultimately, when I trace it back, it was really the gender bias in the equation. From the moment of selling my company, it was my own. It was the belief that I wasn't good enough or strong enough to build an independent, viable business, that I had to rely on some other party in order for me to see economic flourishing, that I just didn't even have a level of confidence that I could do it independent and on my own. And so I do think it's important for us to recognize that in a lot of ways, it's super easy to look externally and say, well, the world is not giving us a chance. And at the same time, I personally think a lot of my own limitations start with my own belief about what I'm capable of doing. And so, can you speak a little bit more about how you've experienced when you're working with women or you're coaching women or even you're just operating in circles where there's a great desire to improve economic empowerment, where sometimes it's just our own stories that we tell ourselves that are not even putting us in the right rooms. I don't know if that's been your experience. Actually, I don't know that you have the same gender bias that I do, but my gender bias for myself has been one of my biggest blind spots. So maybe say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your personal story on this episode because I think it's important for the listeners to know that somebody who's as successful as you has had a version of that. And it is important to unpack it. And I think for me, I don't know if I've had that my own gender bias in that regard, but my spidey ears are listening for it all the time. So I'll give you just some really like common, simple examples that I see all the time. When you pick up any magazine of like Entrepreneur Magazine, uh, Fast Company, like Forbes, all those, when a woman is praised for her business achievements, they tend to be around raising. Like, was she able to raise? She's on Series B. She's on this version. And I think it's really important to unpack that as a piece of the gender narrative because often when that woman is raising, and if that's our symbol of like success, like selling to private equity or getting funded in a certain way, which is a critical part, don't mistake that. But that means that that woman gave away a piece of her IP, a piece of her potential profit, etc. Now, if that's a business strategy, okay. But when that is the narrative of the requirement to be successful, I'm here to say like, no, no, no. When we assess the potential, it's on repeatable, predictable ability to earn. And I say earn, I mean, my professional lens has to do with driving revenue because I primarily work with people who drive revenue. But it's really about this ability to earn. And if there's a predictability in your cash flow, in your salary, in your ability to accelerate those resources, that is really the measure of success because it creates a certain level of security financially and otherwise domestically that I think is underscored. So for me, my spidey sense is always just listening where those misnomers or misconceptions are.
I have to tell you, in my head, like a light bulb moment, I just connected the dots that in a moment where I had built a very strong and healthy and profitable business and it was earning, that for me to see myself as being, an effective business person, it was selling the intellectual property and selling my business seemed like that was the only path. And it wasn't until I came through that journey that I recognized I can actually earn my way into prosperity, that it doesn't mean I have to give it up and forego the freedoms and the independence and the drive and putting myself in somebody else's hands. And I think that is a really curious observation that I effectively was, getting applauded for achieving an outcome. But to your point, it didn't actually occur to me in that moment that I can earn my way into prosperity, that I had to like sell my freedom. And so
Mm-hmm. That right there, I just want to like interrupt. Freedom is the main piece. The end driver is not wealth. So while we think in terms of monetary value, it's not wealth. Wealth is autonomy and options. And that should be a human right for everyone, regardless of if you were fortunate enough to be born in America or whether you have to come. Like, it is the ability to decide for yourself what you want for your life. And I think when we consider selling and exiting as an entrepreneur as a piece of that, or wealth as the ultimate goal, that's where it starts to fall down. That's where even the traction that's been created starts to break
I
down.
think that's such a wise redirect on what wealth is.
Well, and I mean, let me give you a couple of other examples that so I have the great fortune of working with organizations, corporations, businesses, groups that really want to enhance how they're investing in their women. So I want to say that I acknowledge the progress that has been made, and that this is a business strategy, this is a cultural strategy, this is an economic strategy. And I just don't think that there's a full understanding of what that means. So another real simple example, when you're building a go-to-market strategy or a plan for women, there's two different distinctions. I often see the blending of like how we take care of our female employees or our female identifying employees and how we take care of our female clients. Well, those are two very distinct measures. And what I see go wrong in most of those efforts is that companies will create more labor and solve for the talent strategies without focusing on the external audience to the same level of rigor. So it becomes more of like, well, there's extra trainings for you, there's more group stuff for you. There isn't the same level of like, go develop business and generate revenue. It tends to become an internal focusing piece. And only when you shift to these revenue generating pieces, or how we tie our work to revenue generating, does a company or a corporation really increase the capital, pun intended, that they're placing on these jobs to be done. And so another really simple example that I see all the time is like, let's throw a spa day for our women clients. And cool, I love a spa. Like, who doesn't love a spa? Love a spa. Anyone want to send me to Kohler? Like, cool, yeah, I'll go. But when we think about developing business and opportunities, it's really far more simple than that. And to make assumptions about gender that women just want to be at spas and men just want to golf is really where the system starts to break down. So you have to kind of like reverse engineer, like, what is the outcome? If we want more women to do more business together, how do we create the conditions and the environment and the systems to do that? And it isn't a matter of choosing your tactic before you see this as a strategy. So I think it's just really also important to, as we're talking about like misconceptions or places I see it fail, even with good intention, is really applying these gender stereotypes and norms to business development scenarios. And last one, like, oh, well, women are more collaborative and connective by nature, and therefore there is not an instinct to do business together. I agree. Women do care more, tend to care more about connection. Community for women is really important, historically and throughout business and throughout our lives. And that narrative perpetuates the idea that we're getting there just to make friends and not to drive business deals, that there's something wrong with driving economic opportunity or stating what you need or asking for an opportunity. So I just kind of see these norms
Yeah,
perpetuated, these stereotypes and these myths and these misconceptions perpetuated in a way that prevents real
no doubt.
progress.
And I think it's really important, though, and I want to call it out specifically. I think so much of this is the accountability that we need to take on as women to acknowledge that we are often the perpetuators of that one, either because we're not aware of the bias that's in place or that we allow ourselves to fall into these tropes of, this is how we're supposed to do things. Like there's some magical scorecard of this is the way women are supposed to do business together. So I think it's really important to us to kind of bust the myths of these norms in favor of looking at, well, what then is required. And so, a big part of what we're aiming to do with this platform, with the HX Collective, is to not only identify, what is required, what is, what problem are we trying to solve for, but it's also like, how do we make it practical? And as we start to think about how we can help women learn how to do business together in a way that can accelerate economic empowerment, how we can acknowledge that, where there may be struggle, and the starting point, that we don't have to get stuck in the struggle, that there's a real advantage if we have a sense of understanding or a sense of know-how. And so I'd be curious to have you maybe share a few of the things that you are like on point around, and sort of where your business is solving for this. And as to your point earlier, while I too love a good spa day, I think there's so much more foundational effort, particularly if we can build skills or we can have know-how, and like, how does 1 + 1 = 3 when it comes to driving revenue or driving new sales opportunities or new market development. So say a little bit about that, because I think I think it's going to be obvious when people are listening to you. They're going to be like, yeah, okay, I got it. I believe you. Now what the frick am I supposed to do? Like, now what? Okay. So spa day is bad. No, that's not what we're saying. But I mean, like, what do we do? Like, what are you aiming to help us do?
Yeah, you said say a little bit about that. I don't know if I'm capable of saying a little bit about it, but so a couple things. In the last year, I've gotten really curious about where that breakdown is. So I've am fortunate enough to have a front row seat to lots of different professional women in their careers and in their entrepreneurial journeys. So I have this really interesting front row seat to different stages of business and different types of careers. And I can tell you with certainty that if you have an ability to not only generate revenue for yourself, but also to, in a professional environment, tie your work back to a company's revenue or sustainability, it's security. It's job security, it's life security, it's your ability to pick up and leave and have options. That being said, I went down in the last year, I went down this deep dive of saying, like, okay, well, I want to really understand what are the limitations of the women in my network, or why aren't they doing more business together? And so I've started doing research, and I'm still at the entry levels. I have individual survey results to put together research about what that landscape looks like of women doing business together. And so I have about 300 participants right now that have explored and shared information on what prohibits them from doing business with other women and what are things they'd like to see. And there were two really interesting pieces that came out of that. I'm going to pull them up so that I have my own data in front of me. And the number one way that women want to do business together is to drive referrals. Now, that's client referrals. So, can you give me, as an individual person who depends on revenue, an opportunity? Can you give the company that I represent an economic or a paying opportunity? I think is the most important piece. So, can you give me a referral to a paying opportunity? Can you connect me to a job opportunity that either allows me to translate my skills or upskill? But number one piece is having to do with create a paying opportunity for me or the company that I represent. And 48% of participants said that's the number one way they want to do business together. So when you start thinking about, if half of the women are saying, this is how I want to do business, or how I can envision this being the most impactful, then you don't have to break down everything. You start thinking about, well, how do we create more conversations around economic opportunities? How do we share job opportunities? How do we make sure there's a clear understanding of where value is offered and exchanged? What also was interesting is 33%. So the number two reason that women want to do business together is they want business friendships. So they want safe places to talk about business together, to call when they have a question, to have someone be in either what can be the highest points of your career or the lowest points of your career. But having a business bestie was at 33%. Now, I don't know about you. For me, if you haven't noticed already, I'm real focused on economic lens. And so for me, that was a real surprising statistic based on my early research, like a business bestie. And maybe because I'm fortunate to have a lot of this front row seat to other women who are high performers or really prioritize their career, and because I get to work with you so often, I was really surprised by that. So I thought, instead of me trying to solve for everything all at once, how do I really narrow my focus of creating more opportunities for women to do business together? So I've started really simple, quite honestly, like really simple. I run what's called give get sessions, and I do them for specific organizations and for my own network. And they're real simple. You show up, you articulate something you really need right now, personal or professional. So I really need a new nanny, or I'm hiring for a new CFO, or my budget is tight this month. I really need a new paying client, or I need a brainstorming partner. You share a need, and then before you exit that interaction, that session, that webinar, that in person session, you commit to driving, like contributing value to someone else's need. So there's an immediate accountability, there's an immediate contribution, there's an immediate increased awareness over the value that you all have that can drive an outcome for someone else. And so I think a big step is articulating what we need. You have to be able to articulate what you need. Whether, and you have to be confident in that and comfortable with that and in a space that allows for that. And then there has to be a commitment to helping each other. So I've been doing these give get sessions, and they've been really life changing and career changing for a lot of people, because if you tell me you need a job opportunity, my antenna is up, and I'm actively listening for ways to help other people. And so putting women in community in this way versus a spa day has been incredibly impactful immediately and over the long term of relationship development. Two, I've been working really hard on creating, let's say, there's a common adage of in the conversation about how important representation matters and making sure that like we can't be what we can't see. And so one of my goals is really creating higher visibility opportunities for women around the products and services they offer, but additionally, what career paths they have and what lines of business they're in and where they can add experience. And so I'm working, one of my priority projects for this coming year is to really enhance what I call a first call directory. So we need to train ourselves to think women first. And that's not at the expense of men. If you have a male counterpart who is qualified, by all means, you should hire the most qualified or drive the opportunity the most qualified. And it matters when it goes to a woman, particularly a woman of color, because of all those beneficial statistics we've talked about before. So, how do I make it easier to find those people when you need them? If you're hiring someone to post to your social media, if you're looking for a new CFO, if you need a new nanny, how do we drive those opportunities to women of color and to women who really need them and want to be first and center? So those are two of the ways that I'm really trying to change the narrative around here's what I need and here's how I can help and I can drive this. And then lastly, I would say that I'm really fortunate to be surrounded by a lot of amazing, interesting professional women, and so I'm in spaces where my unique experience can become a shared experience, and I have the safe place to talk about the challenges, of being like a working mom or the challenges of negotiating a contract or asking for a resource. Um, I've been retreating with some of women over the last year, and I leave so fulfilled. Like my love tank is full, not only because I nerd out about anything business, but because I'm in a space where I feel seen and heard. Flourishing. I feel like I'm flourishing, like I feel seen and heard. And it occurs to me like I want more women. That's what women are asking for when they're saying they want a bestie. They want to feel seen and heard in this context of you understand where I'm at and you can help me. So I'm really committed to bringing women together to convene in that way that creates a different type of community and isn't around the traumas that we share, but the opportunities that we share. And that feels really critical to me.
All right. So if somebody's listening right now, I'm going to synthesize what I think you're saying in such a really, really powerful and practical way. And I'm going to start with mindset. So on a really practical level, what would you say if I wanted to make, if, as a female business owner, if I wanted to change the trajectory, give me a sense of what my mindset needs to look like to be successful in engaging in this kind of economic empowerment, this opportunity to achieve the outcomes of more mutuality and referral generation, to achieve that workplace bestie. Like, what's the mindset that you would counsel me to shift or change to get started? And then we're going to talk about what are the methodologies, and then ultimately, like, what are those mechanics, those real tactics. But first, mindset. What
Mindset, I would say absolutely one, you should be talking about what you need, what you want, and the value you bring to the table. There is nothing icky, gross, gender conforming about that. Like if you need something, you should talk about it. You should be willing to ask for it. And also to create a space where others can share with you what they need or want or the value they bring to the
All right. So
table.
I think what I'm hearing then is mindset is just to start with the foundation that there's a worthiness of wanting, that there's
Mhm.
that there is nothing incongruous with the core values or being a good girl by wanting more or wanting for more, and that worthiness and that capacity to express desire for more could be a really important shift of mindset coupled with mutuality. I think that sense that it's we're not unto this ourselves. So this is about the
100%.
mindset of one declaration of like, I want more. And number two, I'm willing to give more. Is that safe to say?
Mhm. Yes,
Kind of
absolutely.
at a
Nailed it.
mindset. Okay, now let's talk about methodologies. You've given a couple of different examples, the give get sessions in, kind of personifying that declaration of wanting more, also that desire to give more. You also talked about business retreating. So, this idea of being in community where the gathering thesis is around business. What else would you say, again, on a practical level? What would I do to either put myself in a situation where I could access those kinds of methods of doing business with women, or find, places to retreat or to convene where it's specifically for women? What would you tell me I could do?
Okay, so a couple. First and foremost, yes, finding communities, and that can be a community of one, it can be a community of three, it can be a community of 3,000. Finding yourself in a community where there is a mutuality of exchange is critical, right? Like nothing great is done in isolation. It requires all of us. I think that's like one of the things you might have said on early HX podcasting. Nothing great is accomplished alone. Two, if there is not that community,
Yeah.
then build it. Then build it because it is needed and it is necessary, and no one is coming to save us. No one is coming to rebuild the house. No one is coming to rebuild the system in a way that will immediately consider the benefits for women and the benefits for women of color. So we have to do it. We have to do it ourselves. So if you do not have access to that community, then create it. Create it if it starts with an audience of one or an audience of two. It starts with that commitment of mutuality. So I'm glad you raised that. And then I would say to practice and be message ready. So one piece tactical and one mindset when you are in the space with other women, to honor those needs and wants and to be ready to say and ask for what you need or want. Like, how many of you have been in rooms where it's like, how can I help? What can I do? How can I contribute? And we're like, I don't know. I'll let
Keep
you
me in
know. Or,
mind.
and yeah, keep me in mind. I'm exploring other. No, you have to be confident in what you're asking for and in a way that someone can hear how to help you. So you have to, that's on you to ask for what you need. That's not on anyone else to solve for us. So being really clear about what you need or want and the outcome of that is incumbent on you. So being message ready for when you are in those rooms is is a critical piece. And a place I see it break down often when women are convening. So I will also share in my early research, I asked the question of like what stops you from collaborating with other women professionally. And without by far it was 30 no, I'm sorry, 53% of respondents said that most networking scenarios doesn't drive real outcomes. So I ask you, like, who is that on? If I can put you in a space, who is that on to drive the real outcome? Are you clear on what the outcome is you're driving for? Are you communicating that? Are you asking? Are you expressing the value? So if 53% of people know that most networking isn't going to drive for that, how do we change the container and the system on which we're doing that? So those are some of that's why I started with such simple mechanics and tactics, is because if I can identify what you need and the barriers to that, then I can create and accelerate the opportunity
All right.
exchange.
So we've got the mindset of worthiness and belief that we want, and a mindset of mutuality. From a methodology, it is that spirit of either seek and be curious to find the community or create it. And then when we think about mechanics, it's being ready to articulate what it is that you really, really, really want. It's being equipped with a readiness. I'm hearing that when women say, "How can I help?" we can't default to the, "I don't know, oh shucks," or "keep me in mind." We've got to have a real readiness to articulate it. And then I'm also hearing that when you were in the places and spaces that are designed for business connecting or networking, to take the responsibility to have a clarity of objective, come in prepared and with a game plan, and having maybe some general awareness of what are the things that you have to offer or give. So again, where that mutuality is not only being message ready in the request, but it's also being message ready for the things that you have to give or to have to offer. I think that is such a powerful set of takeaways and so incredibly practical. So I'm really hoping, as we look at our united mission to elevate human flourishing, and very specifically why women, you've given us a really clear and very practical sense of how we can drive outcomes all within our control. We don't have to wait for somebody to come, and we have to recognize, while we have to do it ourselves, doing it alone is not going to be the answer. It's doing it with and through other people. Closing advice, as we wrap today, and things that this is, by the way, the start of, I'm going to forecast more conversations around this particular topic, but at this juncture, as a jumping on spot, closing advice or encouragement that you would give any person, male or female, by the way, who'd be listening.
That's exactly where I was going to go. So I know that there is a diverse audience listening to this, and I would say these lessons don't just apply to women helping women. My whole point is that it is incredibly critical if women are at the center of revolutions, of cultural adoption, of consumer behavior, of workplace transformation. It's incredibly critical to drive economic opportunity. So if you have the ability to do that, whether you're a male or a female, whether you're 25 or 65, whether you live in the UK or the US, like, when you have an opportunity, consider how you drive it to women, because women are at the center of healthy societies and healthy economies. And so that would be more of my closing statement, is like, it is critical. You cannot advance the system without you can't advance equity or equality without political or economic empowerment. And economic empowerment does not come without economic opportunity and autonomy. So keeping that in mind, when you can drive a budget, when you can extend an invitation, when you can make an introduction, like, consider where a woman fits into that, because society benefits from it. It is a much larger conversation, just a nice to have passion project that Andrea and Deb are talking about.
It's interesting. I'll close with an observation. I don't watch a ton of television, as you know. I am about the least pop culture ready human. I think that I know, at least in terms of like watching television shows and being up to speed in my social media game. But one thing I do watch a fair amount of is Shark Tank. I continue to be completely inspired by all the entrepreneurs that come on that show. But one of the particular investors, known as Mr. Wonderful, he described in multiple articles, he said, when I look at all of my investments, I recognize that when I invest in female founders and female-led enterprises, my returns are far greater than, as I look on a comparative basis. And he goes, and don't think for a second that this is about do-gooder. This is not just, I'm not doing this because it's like socially or politically correct, or I'm trying to be like give a handout. He goes, it's about making money. And I think there's I know, right? So I think there's a nod to say that whether we are male or female, when we give women access and an opportunity, it really is about flourishing for all. And I can't wait until we get to pick up this conversation again. And I appreciate the insight that you gave me in helping even connect with my own story. So I can't wait for more of this to unfold as we continue.
Yeah. And women aren't the audience of change, they are the mechanism of change. So whatever you're working on, where are the women and how are you taking care of the women?
Okay, I'm just going to say that's that. All right.
On that note,
I can't wait.
thank you for your time today, Deb. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for being here. If today's conversation sparked something in you, we hope you'll carry it forward with curiosity, compassion, and courage. Subscribe to the show, leave a review, and share this episode with someone who needs it. Until next time, keep exploring what it means to be fully human.